There's a brand new intelligent design movie that has just come out. I'm Dr. Chris Errol. I'm a scientist and an atheist, and I watched the film, and I'm going to give you the rundown right here. And there is even a special guest appearance from none other than the flying spaghetti monster in this movie. Okay, so first of all, this movie is split up into two halves. The first half is kind of like cosmology and the origins of the universe, and the second half relates to the nature and origins of life on Earth. So in the first half, you hear about the Big Bang, how this discovery was made over the course of the early part of the 20th century. In short, they make the case that because the universe has a beginning, if you take the Big Bang as to be the ultimate beginning of the universe, then this means it must have had a creator. That's the simple argument. I'm not a physicist. I know that the argument is not as straightforward as that. There are loads of different things to be said about the origins of the universe, whether there are cyclical processes involved, or whether there are other universes as part of a multiverse. And ultimately, they argue that there's also this fine-tuning argument, that the cosmological constants that we have in this universe point towards them being chosen or selected or fine-tuned by an intelligent creator, some form of supernatural intelligence. I'm going to put a link to a podcast episode with the physicist Sean Carroll, because he talks about the problem of fine-tuning. I thought that was something, that fine-tuning was like a term that was a deliberate mischaracterization of the problem, maybe from a pseudoscientific religious point of view. But actually the fine-tuning challenge of explaining that in physics is very real. And Sean Carroll explains all that, and the idea of a God and how that may fit in as well. So I'll put that podcast episode. I was much more interested in the second half, which is all about the nature and the origins of life on Earth. Now, before I speak about that in any detail, who made this film? What's it all about? Okay, so there's something called the Discovery Institute, which is kind of selling this idea of intelligent design as an actual science. They're trying to claim that it's a legitimate science and it should be treated that way. And this film is based on, and partly written by Stephen Meyer. It's based on his book, The Return of the God Hypothesis. Now that's a book that I have read as well. And yes, I can see the arguments are very similar in this movie. So who is Stephen Meyer, the Discovery Institute, in all this? Well, actually, in 2005, there was a court case because people were unhappy that intelligent design was being brought into the school classroom in the United States of America. Ultimately, that court found in favor of the scientific community and rejected the idea that intelligent design should be brought into the school. And what was it being, when I say brought into the school, what am I talking about? Well, the problematic text in question was a textbook called Of Pandas and People, a creationism textbook. Intelligent design, this idea that we need an intelligent designer that created life, used to be called creationism, but has been remarketed over the years. Now, I had a copy of the textbook Of Pandas and People, and it was none other than something incredibly misleading. It's not a way to educate someone, it's a way to confuse someone and to introduce unscientific concepts at the same time as discussing in some level of detail actual science. So as you can see, mixing them both together creates a very confusing cocktail, particularly for someone who's just set out on their learning journey. So they obviously found in the court case that Of Pandas and People and the concept of intelligent design and some other related concepts were unscientific and therefore not allowed in the classroom. So the continued efforts now, since 2005, are to establish that intelligent design is a legitimate and actual science. Needless to say, it's not. It isn't. And I will explain why by actually now talking about the movie in question. Before I go any further, I mentioned the flying spaghetti monster. So the reason that I said the flying spaghetti monster makes an appearance is there's loads of beautiful graphics throughout this movie that depicts DNA and proteins and the interaction between proteins and DNA. And in one scene, an apparent proofreading protein, so these are proteins which can correct errors that occur in DNA, a fascinating topic, a legitimate scientific topic. But the graphics that appear on screen are of this noodly-like creature with these noodly appendages and these like glowing orb hands at the end of them, which are kind of touching the DNA. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Stephen Meyer, the writer of the film, would have depicted it that way. He is smarter than that. His knowledge is greater than that. If I'm being charitable, this is a miscommunication from the graphics team and the writers. It's quite ridiculous. I don't know if the problem's because it's AI generated graphics or something like that. But you see that a lot now. A lot of stock images of DNA that appear in these books and in these films isn't accurate. It looks like DNA, but when you look at it, it's not. It's off. It's not quite right. If we're doing proper science communication, we're making films, we need to get those things right. We need to show them accurately. This noodly appendage that was clearly some sort of intelligent agent in itself in this scene, that was like crawling up the DNA, absolutely ridiculous. Quite frankly embarrassing and a huge oversight. Why it made the final cut is inexcusable, or maybe people just couldn't find the time to properly assess it. I don't think Stephen Meyer, I'm not going to accuse him of thinking proteins work that way. I know that's not the case. In general, they try to depict a lot of cellular events, but it was always a bit confusing because they would change the way that proteins were represented and the DNA would look different each time. So I don't think that helps conveying complex topics. Now, what is the actual argument, though, that these guys are making? I think my skill set here is actually very relevant. I worked in a molecular microbiology lab working with bacteria on something called the type 6 secretion system. It injects toxins into nearby bacteria to kill them. And actually, I'll put a link to our recent work in the video description. Within intelligent design, one of the scientific arguments is this concept of irreducible complexity. You cannot reduce something further and still have a functional thing. So in the film and in Steve Meyer's book, we're focused on molecular machines. These are machines inside of our cells. So we're talking microscopic, tiny things. And he talks about how they're irreducibly complex. And the guy behind that work is a guy called MOL-BIO. I think he makes an appearance in the film, and he's the guy that was involved in that original court case in 2005. And it's the same example that he's talking about in this film as was discussed in the court case, and that is the bacterial flagellar motor. It's like this corkscrew type thing. It's on the surface of the cell, it rotates, causing the long appendage thing to swirl round, and then that moves and propels the bacteria through the medium towards nutrients and away from toxins or other harmful things. The idea is that it's such an exquisite structure, and they show the structure obviously in the movie. It's such a beautiful structure, so many parts, that if you took one of those parts away, surely it wouldn't be functional. That's not a scientific argument. That's either a clear misrepresentation of how things work, or an inability to comprehend how they might work. And this is the common thing with all of this. What's on display here is the limitations of the current science and the human mind to comprehend these natural processes that we know to occur. The pseudoscientific interpretation of that is because they are too complex and too incredibly intricate to have occurred by chance. It's an old argument, goes back to the 1800s. William Paley, he says if you find a watch, a pocket watch on a beach, It's too exquisitely designed. The parts fit together so well. You have to invoke an external designer. That's not how life works. There is no external designer. Life builds itself from the bottom up. And that's an incredible process, one we're still just at the start of understanding. But you see, the flagellar rotor isn't irreducibly complex. And the work of Kenneth Miller shows that there are similar structures that are related to the flagellar motor, which is the type 3 secretion system. So I mentioned before, I worked on the type 6 secretion system, big needle-like appendage which injects toxins into bacterial cells. Well, the type 3 secretion system does the same thing, but it's also related to this flagella as well, or the flagellum. So it's not irreducibly complex. We can look at a molecular phylogenetic relationship between the type 3 secretion system and the flagellar rotor or motor. It is an incredible structure. I am not trying to diminish that in any way. It's absolutely phenomenal. I'll put some things up on the screen to show this, because it is beautiful, beautiful. The other argument that comes up, and has come up quite a few times from Stephen Meyer, is the idea of specific information in the DNA which encodes for proteins or RNA or functional pieces of RNA. The important point there is that's true. It does encode for proteins. What I think they've omitted here quite drastically is the fact that a lot of DNA sequences, yes, there's the ones that you go, wow, how does that information in the DNA encode for that information in the protein, which then does a job within the cell. But there's also a load of junk DNA sequences. That's something Stephen Meyer's used as an argument for design. He says that we have all this extra DNA as humans, right? We've got loads and loads of DNA. We thought there would be more genes that encode proteins. We find we've got quite a small, or at least a reasonably small number of these protein coding genes and a load of extra DNA sequences. And then Stephen Meyer got very excited about a study that showed that actually a lot of those sequences of DNA, which we don't know what they did, are actually transcribed and made into RNA. So they're not junk, which would be a challenge to maybe intelligent design, because they're intentional, they're specific forms of information. Yet more work has come out since that shows that this could just be noise, as in there's always going to be some level of conversion of the DNA sequence into RNA transcripts. And they put plant DNA into human cells, they made hybrids, and they found that a lot of the plant DNA, which shouldn't really be meaningfully expressed, was. So they think what we're capturing with that original study, which was a real study by the ENCODE group, may actually be noise rather than something functionally or biologically important. So DNA, as you probably, if you've read any of Richard Dawkins' work or thought about evolution in that way, and how the human body has all this kind of idiosyncrasies that don't make any sense. You would never design it that way. Things that loop up and down round things. They're not designed logically. They're not designed. They emerge organically, and there's some kind of counterintuitive things inside the human body, inside animal bodies. But this is true also in DNA sequences. Yes, there are things that encode proteins, but there's also just random bits of virus DNA or something that used to encode a virus that doesn't seem to be doing anything else now. This is in bacteria, but also in humans. There's a couple of more concerning aspects to this. So there are debates within science about some of the ways in which evolution is functioning to create diversity and contribute to the complexity we see in the natural world. The way that Stephen C. Meyer and some of the other people in this documentary, parts of these groups, they're inappropriately trying to capitalize on that fruitful and hopefully useful scientific discourse to say, oh, there's this there's this debate, people are rejecting evolution, or there's debates about evolution. Yeah, there are debates, healthy debates that you should have in any science. But the idea that those people that have progressive ideas about evolution, who are looking at our current most popular models and are suggesting either small modifications or complete reformulations of those ideas, those people are not intelligent design proponents. And I think they take advantage of creating that uncertainty. And I even feel that too, because when I looked at some of those ideas about, an extended evolutionary synthesis, or whatever you want to call it, and I'm not saying where I stand on that. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I'm not sure where I stand on it yet. But I'm not against some sort of open, creative thinking at the edges of our knowledge. But they almost make it sound like, there's no consensus on evolution anymore. No, there is consensus on evolution in the most important ways possible. That is that evolution happened. And it does happen, and it is a large part of the explanation for the appearance of design in the natural world. So yeah, I think and I'll be honest, I think the intelligent design proponents have conveniently managed that disagreement to their advantage. But sometimes the militant atheist side, Jerry Coyne, Richard Dawkins, people like that, have created such a hostile environment that sometimes you can't have reasonable discussions. And I've experienced this myself. I was instantly given a lifetime ban for a Reddit group because someone misinterpreted my work as being something to do with intelligent design, just because it wasn't an outright celebration of everything Richard Dawkins has ever said. It wasn't in support of intelligent design. I'm an atheist. I believe life constructs itself, and would try and understand that self-construction process as one of probably the most interesting things that can happen anywhere in the universe as far as we know. So it's a great challenge, and we enjoy the mystery, and that's a big part of what we explore on this channel here. Okay, a slightly different point now, but probably as important as the last one. That is, there's a lot of people that I know have watched the videos who maybe do believe in God, do come from a faith-based position. I've got no interest in converting anyone to atheism or anything like that. I don't even see the point. I'm interested in the personal relationship people have with their faith and religion from a sort of meaning point of view, and how that may enrich their lives with meaning, or even in some cases detract. It's not as simple as it always being something that adds meaning to someone's life. It depends on the religion, it depends on the person, it depends on a number of different things. But I do care about how people feel. I think at the end of the day, the human experience is something that we should actually take very seriously, and we want as many people to have as positive experiences as possible. So I've no interest in being rude to anybody about any of that stuff. And if I am, I hope that someone will point it out. And I hope that I'll be willing to recognize it as well. We're all human at the end of the day. But the point about this movie is, I hope that you'll join me on this channel as we explore the nature of life, the origin of life, and how it evolves over time, and some of the overlooked aspects of biology that I think are going to be a surprise and very, very interesting to you, as they were to me. As I said, I worked in a lab for 14 years, and it's taken me until very recently to appreciate some of the incredible advances that have been made that complement our evolutionary ideas about how life changes over time and enhance it. And it's a really beautiful and interesting picture that I want to share. And I would hope that we will continue that open-minded approach to learning about what life is. We'll explore, the role of language, the language that we use, how it can mislead, but also it can illuminate. Ultimately, it's a very powerful tool that's allowed us to create science in the first place. But also there are pitfalls that you have to be careful of with your language. also our own cognitive processes, our own wishful thinking, which is what is on display in this movie. I get the appeal that God and science to mutually reinforce each other. It must be, I can see from some of the engagement I've seen about the film, how much that's given certain people. So I'm torn on all of this because I don't want to take that away from people. I don't want to take away the feeling from people. But if you're looking for how to understand your faith within the context of a scientific worldview and our modern understanding of life, this movie is not the place to do it. This movie is going to take you down a path that's going to be, there's wishful thinking, there's ignoring critical information that tells a completely different story from the one presented here. Where does that leave you then in terms of a belief in a God, a supernatural entity of some kind, an ultimate purpose to the universe itself? Well, some scientists do have ideas that are more, you would describe as pantheism. It's a word that can mean a lot of different things, but it's this kind of Einsteinian. Albert Einstein had this kind of reverence for nature itself, the laws of nature. And sometimes would use the word God to describe that. But he did not mean God in the traditional sense of what we would think from religion. So in some senses, it's a bit misleading. So some people kind of have this reverence for the universe, for existence itself, a oneness to the universe as well. Oneness comes into this, a very old idea from the ancient Greeks and probably before, but still has some philosophical discussion today and has had many resurgences throughout history. Ultimately, I believe that life is consistent with the laws of physics and emerged on this planet, and is probably one of the most interesting things we know of that can exist. As to then how we should think about meaning in such a universe, I've spoken about that quite a lot. Check out the videos on the illusion of meaning. But in short, sometimes, and I think it was mentioned at the end of this The Story of Everything movie, about, living in a meaningless universe if you're like an atheist. It wasn't explicitly said like that, but it was alluded to. Well, as I made the point in The Illusion of Meaning, although maybe not very clearly, we don't live in a meaningless universe as atheists. And we actually do have cosmological meaning as well as atheists. Because we are the universe, the matter that makes us up is the same physical matter in the rest of the universe. Of course, there's things like dark matter and other forms of matter, but we'll put that to the side for now. So we are the universe. We are the universe learning to know itself, as Carl Sagan beautifully put it. So the meanings that we construct, that we have the freedom to construct in our lives about how we live, how we relate to others, how we enjoy our time here as when we have it, that is still a cosmological meaning, but it's not some preordained meaning that's written into the fabric of reality. That's always probably going to take some sort of leap of faith of some kind. And I know for believers that leap of faith isn't even seen as necessarily a bad thing. It could even be seen as a positive commitment to belief, to overcome that doubt, and doubt plays a big role in Christianity and stuff. So, look, honestly, it doesn't bother me either way whether someone believes in God. I hope I haven't been too balanced here, that it comes across that I'm giving some credit to intelligent design. It really is not the way to do the science of life. It's not a science. It's not how anybody practices science in biology at all. Well, there's a couple of them, and they're in this movie, and they're friends of Stephen Meyer, and they work together on this stuff. But they mischaracterize the nature of matter, and how they talk about how the likelihood of just like shaking up all these amino acids and them randomly assembling into a protein is just so astronomically small But that's a mischaracterization. It's making out that it's all pure chance. Just shake it all up. It's all chaos, all chance. Shake it up and just hope that it fits into place. And it's astronomically so unlikely that it can't be explained without some sort of intelligence that made that happen. That's a mischaracterization. There are constructive processes that occur in the universe. It's not all just a random chaotic jumble. Stars, planets, these are all ordered structures that emerge in the universe. And there are even this very, very peculiar and fascinating example of self-organizing, self-constructing matter that we call life as well. The challenge is to explain that, not to say, oh, it's so complicated, it must be an external supernatural entity that did it. Absolutely not. That's not science, and it never will be. Thanks for watching. I know there might be some mixed reactions to this one, but in terms of the problems of intelligent design, particularly how they're trying to encroach into education, it's quite a serious issue, actually. It's a real problem. So I have to be quite clear in my response to this movie, because it will have brought people joy. It will have brought people so much solace and comfort and connection to their beliefs and to the world around them, the scientific modern world we find ourselves in. I've no interest in ruining that for people, but I have to challenge the science. They're claiming intelligent design is a science. It's not.